Welcome to Chapter 11, Decisions and Creativity. A common conversation around my house between my wife and I goes something like this. See if you recognize it. I say, "Where do you want to go eat?" She says, "I don't know. Where do you want to go eat?" "I don't care. It's up to you." She says, "No, I decided last time. It's up to you this time." "No, you decide. I don't want to." She says, "Okay, let's go to Old Charlie's." "I don't really feel like Old Charlie's." "Okay, so where do you want to go?" "I don't know, you decide." Sound familiar? If we can't even decide where to eat, can we possibly make the important decisions of life? Now, of course, there's a big difference between making mundane decisions and big life decisions. And all in all, we've done pretty well with those big life decisions. But decision making is a common activity for us as individuals, and it's difficult. It's even more difficult for groups. How do we get individuals in the group to make decisions? And also, more importantly, how do we get them to support the decisions that have already been made? In this lecture, I will explore major versus mundane decisions and how either can impact others greatly. I'm sure we all have our own stories of decision making, dumb things we have done or dumb things we've observed others doing. I certainly have mine, but I don't think I'll be sharing the dumb decisions I've made because there's just too many of them. But I will share a few business-related stories, not necessarily dumb, to support the text material. I'll spend a fair amount of time discussing big data, as the authors call it. Since we're all aware of the benefits of big data and what it brings to our world, I'll share some of the disadvantages as I see them. I'm sure some of you will disagree and probably think I'm just a bitter, technologically challenged old man. I'm probably right, but I still think it's an interesting topic and my views adds something different to that discussion. And for the record, I'm not bitter, just confused. I'll offer a decision model for groups that I've used for years to simplify the concept of group decision making. And finally, we will briefly discuss emotions in decision making and creativity. Oh, and I'll cover one last thought. Our propensity to engage in what-if scenarios, particularly after major decisions. What if should quickly turn into what's next. And what's next is the last step in the decision-making process. What's next? Well, next we will cover power, influence, politics, and leadership. Those four factors are probably the cause of decision-making and perhaps the result of decision-making in many cases. Regardless, they are readily hooked to the topic covered in this chapter. And I think I have just made a decision to stop. Welcome to Chapter 11, Decision-Making and Creativity. Decisions, decisions, decisions. There are so many decisions to be made. I'm tired of decisions. I don't want to make any more decisions. Of course, that's a decision in and of itself. Truth is, we cannot not make decisions. It's like breathing. We can't not breathe, at least for long. It doesn't matter how smart or dumb one is. We all make decisions and we are all judged by them. And we are constantly judged by them. Now, I'm sure that was a duh moment for most of you, and you're sitting there thinking, this guy has a way of stating the obvious and wasting my time. But I want to make this point to emphasize how important decision making is for our life and for our future. It's important to put this topic into context. We generally take major decisions seriously. We also make so many decisions that we tend to take decision making itself for granted, particularly the mundane decisions. But what is a mundane decision? What is a serious decision? Well, for the most part, serious decisions are pretty easy to recognize. Choosing a field of study, choosing a job or a career, getting married, having children, buying a house, etc. These are big, life-impacting decisions that have an impact on us as individuals and also those around us. Mundane decisions are everything else. But can seemingly mundane decisions turn into big decisions? Can low impact personal decisions ultimately have major impacts on others? You bet they can. And if you make big decisions without carefully deliberating and analyzing the choices, the options and opportunities and potential outcomes, you're a fool. But maybe we should be more deliberate about the mundane decisions. Maybe we should analyze those more and understand the potential impacts of those decisions as well. Think about it. Does anyone ever decide to become addicted to drugs or alcohol? But addiction is a result of many seemingly mundane decisions. I used to be a smoker, a big smoker. I didn't decide one day that I wanted to be addicted to tobacco. It was the outcome of one or more mundane decisions that turned out to be life changing. A decision to try a cigarette, a decision to just have one. When I quit smoking several years ago, it was the outcome of a major life decision to be tobacco free. But all of that came from a mundane decision. So, what we decide today, even the smallest decision, can have huge impacts on us and those around us. I guess you could say that there are a lot more big decisions than we think and a lot less mundane decisions than we expect. Take decision making seriously because it is serious business. As mentioned previously, the other aspect of decision making that is important is that our decisions certainly impact us, but they also have impact on many others as well. And the range of that impact can be much greater than we imagine. And that is particularly true in organizations. Let me give you an example. When I worked at RCA Corporation, the R&D people developed a product called the video disc player. It looked like a 33 and a third RPM record. That gives you an idea of how long ago this was. And it played movies. This was just around the time that VCR players were first hitting the market. Yes, I am that old. They brought the prototype product to our facility to preview it with managers and employees to get some feedback as we actually represented a pool of potential consumers. The feedback we gave was clear and concise. When asked if it recorded, the R&D engineers stated that it didn't record, but it had a magnificent picture quality. Understand, recording movies was a brand new thing in those days. Our response was that we thought the ability to record was much more important than picture quality to most people. That feedback didn't seem to faze the R&D people, and someone somewhere made the decision to go ahead and produce the product and introduce it into the marketplace. And the product would be made in our facility and marketed nationwide. To accommodate the new production requirements, we hired nearly 500 people and purchased equipment and everything else necessary to produce the product and get it to the marketplace. Guess what? The public's reaction was predictable. It was the same as ours. It doesn't record, so we will just purchase a VCR player instead. The product and production lasted a couple of years and then failed big. Millions of dollars were wasted by a company that was already struggling. All 500 employees lost their job, and the product failure didn't help the RCA reputation in the marketplace one bit. What was the impact of that decision? How many of those 500 employees left solid jobs to come to work for RCA and subsequently become unemployed? How many homes were lost? How many children couldn't receive higher education due to that decision? How did that decision and the waste of millions of dollars contribute to the subsequent dissolution of RCA Corporation? I don't suppose anyone knows for sure, but the impact was big, and not only on the decision maker, but on a whole range of people unseen. Now, obviously, that's a big decision, most likely made with lots of supporting data and information. Whoever made that decision didn't do it with malice. But it points out that one decision can have a huge impact on many people, and those impacts are far from immediate. We may not actually see the results for years. The text begins the chapter with several examples of stupid decisions on the part of interviewees. I enjoyed that part. I have another one to amuse you. When I worked at Nestle, we advertised for an engineer position. We were looking for someone just a few years out of college and with a little experience. And we had several resumes and applicants. We screened the resumes and began the interview process. One day, a well qualified applicant arrived for an interview. We were very optimistic about this applicant. While he was interviewing, 4 of our female administrative employees came rushing into my office and asked if we were interviewing someone for the engineer position. I affirmed that we were, and they asked if the individual fit the description they provided. I also affirmed that question. Then they stated, "We don't want to hire him." When I asked why, they explained that they were returning from lunch in their car, and as they entered the parking lot, they observed the applicant relieving himself against the front of the building. Yes, relieving himself does not mean taking a rest. It means what you think it means. I was astounded. I questioned the applicant, and he confirmed that he had to go, so he went. In front of the building, in broad daylight. Obviously, since he relieved himself against our building, we relieved him from consideration. He was referred by a headhunter, and when I explained why we would no longer consider the young man, the headhunter was astounded as well. Just think, what impact did his decision have on his job search? What impact did it have on his family? What impact did it have on our organization? He could have been the next Thomas Edison after all. Now on page 371, the authors detail 3 key decision-making blunders. Rushing to judgment, selecting readily available ideas or solutions, which usually means the easy solution, making poor allocation of resources to study alternative solutions. But I think they left one blunder off the list, and that is not making a decision at all. Not making a decision can be just as bad as making a bad decision. Not taking action can be as bad as taking action that fails. When a bad decision is made, it can be corrected and we learn from the failure. We learn very little from inaction or from no decision. And I fear in our government and organizations, there are a lot of situations where no decision is made while we wait for the situation to change or the data to come in. Leaders make proactive decisions. Leaders are not procrastinators. And the concept that things will get better if I just do nothing is way overblown. Avoiding decisions is as bad as avoiding conflict, which we discussed in the last chapter. I would rather correct a bad decision than make no decision and hope things get better. This is one scenario where hope is not good. But we must ask ourselves why people avoid decision making. I worked with an executive team that had a few critical managerial openings in their ranks. We initiated a recruiting plan using our own resources and headhunters. We brought several well-qualified candidates in for interviews. The entire executive team operated as an interview team and took part in the selection. Even though they were impressed by many of the applicants, they could not choose one, and the executive in charge couldn't decide either. The positions remained open for several months. My frustration level was epic, and I couldn't understand why they could not reach a decision. I remember discussing the situation in a staff meeting, and the reason gradually came to light. They were searching for the perfect candidate, and they all had a different idea of the attributes of the perfect candidate, even though they agreed on the hiring criteria at the beginning of the process. They were looking for the perfect solution, and they were afraid to make a hiring mistake. I remember telling them that if we looked for the perfect candidate when we hired them, none of them would be employed now. They were constantly looking for more data. It was a symptom of a greater problem I believe we face in government, business, and our society today: the evil of big data. The text briefly discusses big data and its impact on decision making. I'd like to expand on that somewhat and add a little different perspective. The authors define big data as the vast quantity of data available for decision making. And that data is readily available to everyone. What did we do before big data? How did we make decisions in the good old days? Well, obviously, people made decisions before big data and probably, from all indications, made pretty good decisions. So, what does big data contribute to the decision making process? You know, when you think about it, that's a great question. Does big data make our decisions better? Well, judging from what I've seen in business and government, I don't think the decisions are necessarily any better. Does big data make our decisions and our decision making process faster? Well, not that I can see. I'm not saying that big data is bad, but I don't believe it provides the panacea of better, faster, more responsible decisions many claim. Big data makes decision making more difficult and slower today, in my opinion. The presence of big data changes the expectations for decisions and the atmosphere surrounding decision making in government, business, and our private lives. Because we have big data, we expect flawless decisions. Before big data, we expected quality decisions but had a higher level of tolerance for bad or imperfect decisions. And the consequences for making mistakes are higher today than before big data entered the picture. In many respects, we have become hesitant to make decisions without a wealth of data to support that decision. Follow the data and it will lead you to the solution is the battle cry of detail leaders and managers. But the data doesn't lead one to a foolproof solution. Data helps direct decision makers, data helps clarify problems for decision makers, but data is not perfect. One can find data to support nearly any position one espouses. Data is a look backwards, not forward. Data looks at what has happened, but is an imperfect predictor of what may occur. And to wait for that imperfect predictor to predict what will happen to make the decision safer is futile. I have been in many organizational meetings where important decisions were contemplated and someone always says, "What does the data say?" I've been in a few of such meetings where astute and courageous leaders have said, "Forget more data. We know what we must do. Data won't change the decision." And I have been in organizational meetings contemplating a failed decisions when leaders ask, "What did the data say?" As if the data would change the outcome. In that case, data is not being used to solve problems and make decisions. It is being used to assess blame. Data is a tool, and like any tool, it can be overused or underused. It can be helpful or it can be a hindrance. Used properly, it can speed up the process, but used improperly or to excess, it will slow down the decision process immensely. And the multitude of data available can make leaders more hesitant to make decisions and take the risk readily accepted by strong leaders and strong decision makers. In my opinion, big data has weakened leadership in our government and organizations. In my opinion, big data makes decision making more difficult. In my opinion, big data has rendered the gut or intuition decision a rarity. I like gut decisions when appropriate. I like using data when appropriate too. I don't like using gut or data to excess. The balance between gut decisions and data-driven decisions is out of balance. Now think about that. And what do you think? So given that we are going to make a decision, I have a model to share that I have used in organizations thousands of times to define and simplify decision making in a group setting. There are only 4 kinds of group decisions that can be made in any organization. Each has advantages and disadvantages, and the defining aspects of the decision is the amount of support that may be expected and the time it takes to make the decision. Decisions without support are destined to fail, and decisions made too late are hindered at the outset. The four kinds of decisions are: minority decision. Only one person is necessary to make a minority decision. It is an autocratic decision style marked by do it my way. It takes little time to make this decision, and support can be questionable since buy-in is not a priority. Majority decision. A majority decision is normally marked by voting. It takes a little more time than a minority decision, but still, in most cases, very little time to reach a decision. It doesn't take long to vote. We generally expect voting to result in over 50% support for the decision. However, with a vote of two alternatives, it is possible to have 49% of the group disagree so strongly that they will work diligently to ensure failure. Also, if more than two options are included in the vote, it is possible to have less than 50% support for the ultimate decision. For example, in a group of 10 people, you could have 3 people vote for X, 3 people vote for Y, and 4 people vote for Z. Z is the accepted decision, even though 60% of the group is opposed. Number 3 is consensus. Reaching a consensus decision takes a significant amount of time to accomplish. However, support is very high. The agreed upon decision may not be my first choice, but it is a choice that I can live with and support. Everyone in the group agrees to support the decision. And finally, fourth, unanimous. Unanimous decision has 100% support and represents the first choice of everyone in the group. It obviously takes forever to reach such a decision, or at least a long time, and may not actually be possible with some issues and in some groups. The two salient aspects of this decision-making process are time and support, because time is certainly an issue in some decisions. And support is always an issue. Once again, poorly supported decisions have a greater likelihood of failure. And regardless of how good a decision may be, if it is destined to failure due to lack of support, the decision is not useful. This simple model puts decision-making in groups and organizations into perspective and guides us in choosing a decision-making method. There is a time and place for minority decisions. Sometimes decisions have to be made quickly, and there is little time for group input. In that case, a decision maker must be cautious about the level of support that may be expected and may want to do some follow-up work with the group to ensure support grows. When group input can be received, the tendency is to vote on the decision. Voting is easy and it's quick. However, in team environments, voting can be deadly in terms of garnering support for success. In all of the team environments I have established, I have outlawed voting. No issue was ever to be resolved by a vote. If we have time for team input, I required all teams to reach consensus. And these consensus expectations allowed teams to ensure time was spent to garner support from everyone, not just a simple majority. If there was not time to reach consensus, then a minority decision was acceptable. Of course, the optimum decision method is to reach unanimous decision, but it's very unlikely that will ever take place. So in team environments, in my world, I believe that consensus or minority decisions are the only two acceptable decision-making alternatives. But I'm open to your thoughts as well. During the decision process, either individual or group, I would draw your attention to the 8 biases listed on page 376. These are real, and I've seen them at work in many decisions, both group and individual. You may not be able to prevent bias, but recognizing the appropriate bias may help mitigate or minimize its impact on the final decision. The text also discusses emotions on page 371. Should we leave emotions out of our decision-making process? Should decisions be totally rational? I'll let you answer that for your own decisions, but for my part, emotions have a needed place in decision-making. If all decisions are rational, many of our most revered decisions would never have been made. The odds were against them. Our founding fathers would never have made the decisions necessary to create this great nation. Many of our historical heroes, domestic, military, and government, would not have acted as they did. The odds were against them. We see the impact of emotions on decisions all around us in our daily lives, in business, in athletics, and on and on. Emotions are there and should be a factor. However, they should be a factor and not the only determinant in the decision process. And finally, let me add a little to the discussion of creativity. Strong decision making and creativity is a function of courageous leadership. Leaders without courage stifle both decision making and creativity. But courageous leaders make creative decisions and set an example for others. Let me give you an example. When I worked for Nestle, the VP of operations was a gentleman named Gary Larson. Gary was one of the finest leaders I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I mentioned that the facility was a startup and we only had a few employees, probably between 50 and 100, and the operations were very new. We had just started producing saleable products, and we had a severe accident on the production line. An employee became entangled in a conveyor belt on the line and broke her arm in 4 places. It was a gruesome accident witnessed by a lot of people. Gary's initial concern, of course, was for the employee. He then immediately shut down the production and no more product was produced, even though there was high demand for the product in the marketplace. Once medical attention was administered and the employee was transferred to the hospital, Gary called all employees together for a meeting. And then he did something I have never seen a production executive do in my career. He told all employees that anyone who felt upset and needed to leave, they could leave and they would be paid for the time they missed. He directed all employees to spend as much time as needed inspecting the production line to ensure that all safeguards are in place, and new safeguards were added to ensure no one ever gets hurt again. He directed all employees on each production line to do the same. He further explained that no production would begin again until all employees were assured that the lines were safe and each employee felt comfortable working. That's pretty much unanimous confirmation. In other words, no product would be produced until all production activity was safe in the eyes of every employee. Understand, this process could take days. And during those days, everyone was paid and no product was produced. When questioned by some managers, he calmly asserted, "We say employee safety is the most important thing to us, more important than production. It's time to live what we say." Well, the line started again the next day, but only after all employees agreed that they were safe. Employees understood the importance of safety. Employees understood their value to the company. Employees understood the leadership qualities of Gary and henceforth would do anything he asked of them. That was a creative decision. That was a courageous decision. That was an ethical decision. And that is why Gary is one of the finest leaders I've ever met. Decision making and creativity go hand in hand and are the result of courageous leadership. One last thought. When we make bad decisions or stupid decisions or even good decisions, we often start with the what if scenarios. What if I decided this or decided that? What if I did this or what if I did that? Decisions, even when carefully made, can cause a lot of worry and doubt. Decision making is stressful, and that's another reason people run away from decision making. What if scenarios are useful if used as a learning tool, but they should not last long. What if scenarios have a very short shelf life? Once the learning has taken place, what if only serves to waste time and hinders corrective action or hinders work on the next decision that must be made. What if should quickly be replaced with what's next. That's leadership, and that's progress. And what's next is always the last step in the decision-making process. So what is your decision-making style? If your desire is to manage and lead people, you must understand and embrace decision-making. And the good news is that decision-making is a learned skill. This chapter begins that learning process.